I've been working on a project. I've found a solution to a problem. Actually, it's a solution in search of a problem.
Well, this all started a couple weeks ago when I did that video about my sketch journal notebook. We went through 2 of those notebooks covering the year 2022, as you might remember, the last video. Well, then some interesting things started happening in the typosphere, is especially about the last week or so. My friend Ted Munk, who you might know runs the typewriter database, very key person in the typosphere, he started getting into making handmade, what he calls everyday carry notebooks that can be opened up and the pages removed and reordered and added to and changed, which he's posted at least 3 blog articles now about this project of his, and I'll leave a link down below to his blog articles. I think you guys really need to read them. In the process of Ted's deep dive into everyday carry notebooks and handmade notebooks, I started sketching in my sketch journal this weird idea to fix a problem that nobody really has. Let me explain. Well, you might remember this was the last page that we covered in that video about my sketch journal, but this was the next page that I sketched. We didn't really cover it because this is the year 2023, but what was this about? This is slightly rectangular staggered pages. This is the solution looking for a problem. And what this is about is the idea of thumbing through a notebook like that. And you have this problem, or is it a problem? You have a problem where sometimes you can't thumb through every page because you kind of skip them, because the pages are all jammed together in this tight bundle. And when you try to bend it a little bit and try to thumb through it, it just skips, right? And so what I was thinking is you needed some kind of a way to stagger the pages a little bit so there's a little bit of space between them, and it makes it easier to thumb through the notebook. This is the great problem in Western civilization. You can't thumb through the notebook very easily. And so I had this idea that if you could stagger the pages in terms of short pages and long pages here out on the edge where you would normally open the book, if you could have short and long pages, then the pages would be separated. The long pages that actually stick out at the edge where you're actually touching would be separated by shorter pages in between. It puts a little bit of gap, a space between the pages, and it helps you thumb through them a little bit better. Well, that's what this silly little sketch journal page was about that I did on the 2nd of January. And in order to prove this, or in order to test it out as a theory, I first wanted to do something really basic, and that is, without even making a book or notebook, I wanted to just try it out on a stack of paper. And so what I did is I got some index cards, 3x5 inch index cards. And for you living in the rest of the world, it's some metric value. It's not 3x5 inches. But what I did is I kind of staggered them horizontally and vertically here so that we have this kind of pack right here where the long pages or the long cards are sticking out maybe 5 millimeters or a 1/4 inch or so, sticking out from the others that are shorter. And it's really interesting, even though I haven't really lined up the edge of this very well, see that they're not really bound very evenly, I can actually thumb through almost all of these pretty easily without skipping. I mean, it's kind of an interesting effect. I don't know if you can see the staggering there going on. Yeah, so what happens is that these short pages or the short cards in between are given a little bit of space between the long ones, and it just helps you to thumb through it a little bit better. Now, clearly, the index cards are stiffer than the average notebook paper or sketch journal paper. So there's the fact of the amount of stagger you give is related to how stiff the paper is. And so I wanted to test this theory out by making a couple test notebooks. Well, the first thing I found was in my collection of old papers, I had one of these AMPAD writing tablets. These are letter writing paper tablets, 6 by 9 inch. They don't tell you the weight of the paper, but it's quite thin paper. And I took the rest of this paper and I essentially cut them in half, except I made the cut slightly off center. So 6 by 9 inches, let's say, 1/8 of an inch away from being perfectly centered. So that would be the 9-inch side, half of that's 4.5. So it's really like 4 3/8. And so when you stagger those pages together, you end up with a 1/4 inch gap, or 1/4 inch stagger between the long and the short pages. I glue bound these papers together. So I bundled them up, tightly packed where the spine is nice and even, and then I glue bound the spine using this neutral pH bookbinding PVA cement. So I put a couple layers of glue on here to bind all the pages together. And then I glued it to a 2022 calendar that we were going to discard. Decided, hey, I could save these calendar photos and make them into covers for notebooks. Now this particular one happens to be the front cover of a calendar, and so it's actually rather thick. It's quite stiff, cardboardy looking, so it worked really well as a heavy cover. And then I used Southworth marbled paper as end papers, and I'm using an Uhu glue stick to glue the end papers into the book. But it turned out to be quite nice. I didn't do any rounding of the corners. I could have, but basically thumbing through this, it looks really like you can easily thumb through it and find any particular page you want because they're all staggered. Long, short, long, short, long, short. Yes, this is a solution looking for a problem. I realize that. But I was quite pleased with the quality of this notebook that I made. And so, encouraged by that, I went one step further based on the idea I had described here in my sketch journal, which was using pages that are the same size, but staggering them horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical. So for this second book, I made them basically square, except they're not exactly square. It's almost square, but one side is a little bit longer than the other. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are square. So what I did here is I arranged these slightly unsquare pages horizontal, vertical, similar to what I did with the index card test stack. And then I aligned the spine and the bottom edge of the book so they're nice and even, and then I glue bound the book together. Once you've staggered the pages horizontal, vertical, you end up with this kind of an interesting upper right corner where you can see they're staggered here. And this gives you not only the ability to thumb through the book easily without skipping pages like you normally would, but also the top edge of the book now also is the same way. You can thumb through the top edge of the book. And why is that an advantage? Well, let's say you took a marker pens of different colors and you color-coded some of these pages as kind of like a tab system where you could see these color-coded marks on the top edge of the page. You could refer to those. You could thumb through those pages and find exactly one of those tabs and thumb to it. So 2 ways to make these staggered notebooks. One way is you have to cut the paper into 2 different sizes, the narrow and the wide. The other way is you cut the pages to be the same, but then you stagger them horizontal, vertical. And this second way gives you staggering not only on the opening edge of the book, but on the top edge of the book as well, giving you a second way of thumbing through the pages if you want to do that. And it gives you kind of an interesting little corner here as well. So there's an idea that you might want to consider if you're into homemade notebooks, using your old 2022 calendar photos. Get some white glue, get some hardware store clamps. No, you don't need a bookbinding press. Get some scraps of old plywood to use with your clamps, and you can do your own bookbinding at home. So if this project represents anything, it represents how my sketch journals tend to function in my creative life. I come up with a harebrained scheme, just a tiny little idea that's not very important, and I sketch it up as much as I can, expanding on the idea in my sketch journal, and then it becomes inspiration for building something as a project, and then that becomes inspiration for sharing with you this idea on video, this idea that is a solution looking for a problem. I'm Joe Van Cleve. Stay creative, be well. Until next time, have a good day.